The courtroom was packed. A frail black man, clothes tattered, hands trembling, shuffled into the defendant's chair. His face showed exhaustion, not from the night before, but from decades of life hard-lived. Most in the room saw just another homeless man, accused of trespassing and resisting arrest. Whispers echoed, "He's just another burden." The bailiff called the judge. Everyone rose, the routine formality masking the silent judgment already passed in their minds. But then, everything changed. As the judge picked up the file and read the man's name aloud, his hands froze. A pause. His eyes widened. Silence filled the room. In a voice trembling with disbelief, the judge asked, "Is this Sergeant Elijah Boone?" The room didn't move. Then slowly, one by one, people began to stand, not out of procedure, but out of reverence. Because this wasn't just a homeless man on trial. This was a forgotten hero returning to the light. Sergeant Elijah Boone had once been a name spoken with pride, etched on medals, echoed in battlefield stories, and honored in military halls. A combat veteran who had saved lives and risked his own more times than anyone could count. But life after service hadn't treated him kindly. No support, no shelter, and no recognition. Years passed, and his uniform was replaced with worn jackets and street blankets. He became invisible to the world he once served. That was until one quiet morning when he was arrested for sleeping near a federal building, his last resort against a cold night. No one asked about his past. No one cared. Until fate brought him into a courtroom where someone remembered. What followed wasn't just a trial, it was a reckoning. A story of loss, loyalty, and redemption that would shake the foundations of the justice system and remind the world who Sergeant Elijah Boone really was. It was just after 3 a.m. when Officer Jenkins found him curled beneath the overhang of a government building, clutching a military backpack that had seen better days. He wasn't disturbing anyone. He wasn't violent. He wasn't loud. But he was trespassing. The report had come from a security guard who feared vagrants might create trouble. As Jenkins approached, the man sat upright slowly, blinking into the flashlight beam. His speech was soft, his words polite. "I'll move," he said. "Just needed somewhere warm tonight." But protocol was protocol. With deep reluctance, the officer took him into custody. At the station, he gave his name, Elijah Boone. No ID, no home address. He was charged with trespassing and resisting when he hesitated to release his bag. Inside it were dog tags, a letter from 1983, and a medal tucked inside a sock. He spent the weekend in a holding cell, mostly in silence. Inmates left him alone. Something about him demanded respect without a word. But no one really saw who he was, just another homeless man passing through a broken system. On Monday morning, a public defender scanned the file and sighed. Another lost case, another small hearing. No one had any idea who had just walked through the courthouse doors. The courtroom wasn't grand, but it held the weight of justice. Fluorescent lights hummed. The usual crowd of minor cases filled the benches: petty theft, disorderly conduct, trespassing. Elijah Boone, clad in a county-issued shirt and worn jeans, was escorted in, his hands cuffed lightly in front. His walk was steady, not proud, but not broken either. The public defender had prepared no speech. This was expected to be a fast judgment: plead guilty, time served, case closed. But something in Elijah's posture made even the bored bailiff pause. He stood, not defiant, not afraid, but with the kind of calm that came from facing far worse than a courtroom. People whispered. Some noticed the military tattoos on his forearm. Others just assumed he was another man who had slipped through the cracks. No family came. No one sat beside him. He didn't look around the room. He kept his gaze forward, steady, as though expecting something or someone. A prosecutor barely looked up as the clerk called the next case: State of California versus Elijah Boone. The judge stepped in from chambers, took his seat, and began flipping through the next file, as routine. Nothing seemed unusual until he paused. His eyes stopped on the page. His fingers froze mid-turn. And then, in a voice louder than necessary, the judge asked, "Is this Elijah Boone, United States Army, Bronze Star recipient?" The silence was immediate. Heads turned. The tension in the room thickened. This wasn't just a man who had fallen from grace. This was a soldier who had stood for the nation. And suddenly, the air in that courtroom shifted. Judge Raymond Clark had presided over hundreds of cases, but nothing ever froze him like this moment. He reread the name, checking the details. The service record, the awards, the commendation letter attached like an afterthought. This was not some formality. This was history. He slowly lifted his eyes from the file and looked at the man sitting quietly before him. Older now, weathered and beaten down by time, but the name stirred memories. Not headlines, stories from the battlefield, stories shared among veterans. Clark himself had served years ago. And the name, Elijah Boone, had passed through military circles like legend. He cleared his throat. Mr. Boone, Sergeant Boone, is that correct? The room was still. Elijah nodded once. Yes, sir. You served in Operation Desert Storm? The judge asked. Yes, sir. Clark stood up, not as a judge, but as a soldier paying respect. The bailiff blinked in disbelief. Then slowly, other veterans in the courtroom began to rise. One by one. Even the prosecutor stood, stunned, hands by his side. It was no longer a trial. It was a moment of truth. Elijah remained seated, unsure what was happening. He hadn't asked for recognition. He hadn't demanded honor. But in that instant, the courtroom wasn't looking at a homeless man. They were looking at a hero, forgotten by the world, but remembered by his name. The judge took off his glasses. His voice cracked. This man is not a criminal. He is a patriot, and this court owes him far more than judgment. As Judge Clark set the file down, he looked across the courtroom and said, "Before we proceed, the court needs to understand who this man is." The courtroom, now hushed and reverent, watched as Clark recalled stories he had heard long ago. About a brave sergeant who carried 2 wounded comrades out of an ambush zone under heavy fire, refusing to retreat. That man was Elijah Boone. The judge asked Elijah if he would speak. At first, Elijah declined. But when Clark gently insisted, Elijah rose. He spoke slowly.
I served because I believed in something bigger than myself. I never expected a reward for that. But when I came home, it was like I never left the battlefield. Just a different kind of war. I lost my family. I lost my home. The nightmares didn't stop. And eventually, I lost my way.
There were no theatrics, no tears, just quiet honesty. One of the court staff searched online and found an old photo. Elijah in uniform, younger, standing beside his canine partner and fellow soldiers. The image was shown on a courtroom screen. Gasps rippled through the room. The public defender, until now silent, stood and requested the court to consider his service as mitigating circumstance. But the judge didn't need a plea. What began as a petty trespassing charge had now become a spotlight on injustice, the kind faced by countless veterans left to fade into the margins. Clark looked at Elijah and said, "Your story reminds us all why we should never forget." A solemn hush fell over the courtroom, not from legal order, but deep human emotion. As Elijah returned to his seat, several attendees, some veterans, other strangers, rose from their benches, not commanded, but moved by sheer respect. The gesture spread like wildfire through the room. Even the bailiff, usually rigid and unreadable, wiped a tear from the corner of his eye. The judge remained standing. It is not every day this court witnesses a man who has given so much and asked for so little. Reporters who happened to be covering other cases began taking notes. Phones buzzed. News traveled fast. Within minutes, photos of Elijah Boone in court were shared online, his old military photo next to his current image. One headline read, "Forgotten Hero Stands Trial. Entire courtroom stands with him." The prosecutor, visibly shaken, stood up and did something rare. He withdrew all charges. This man deserves honor, not punishment. Applause broke out, spontaneous and sincere. Elijah sat in quiet awe, unsure what to do with the flood of attention. He had come expecting handcuffs and shame, and instead found gratitude. Then, something unexpected happened. A woman in the back row approached the bench. She was part of a local nonprofit that helped homeless veterans. She asked permission to speak and offered Elijah a place in their shelter and program. No cost, no strings. With a trembling voice, Elijah asked, "Why now?" The judge answered, "Because we failed you before. But not today." Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Elijah sat in a clean room for the first time in years. A warm bed, a hot meal, and silence. Not the kind that echoes in loneliness, but the kind that brings peace. For the first time in decades, he felt safe. Word of his story spread quickly. News outlets shared the clip of the courtroom rising. Veterans from all over the country sent letters, some remembering him from service, others simply thanking him. One message read, "You reminded me of what I fought for." A week later, Elijah stood again. He was invited as an honored guest. Clean-shaven in borrowed dress blues, he looked like the man he once was. As his name was called, a long line of soldiers saluted. Tears flowed freely, his and theirs. Judge Clark attended, standing quietly in the back. After the event, he approached Elijah and said, "We honor the uniform, but we failed the man. Thank you for letting us correct that." Elijah nodded, his voice firm now. "You didn't fail. You reminded them. That matters more." And with that, the man who had once been invisible walked out of the shadow and into a world that finally saw him, not just as a homeless veteran, but as the hero he always was. Elijah Boone walked into court as a forgotten man, but walked out as a symbol of honor and redemption. His story reminded the world that behind every homeless face, there may be a hero we once celebrated and later ignored. As his name echoed across the headlines and hearts, Elijah did not seek praise, only peace. And through one judge's recognition, one courtroom's respect, and one final salute, a long-lost warrior was finally seen. Let this be a reminder: every veteran deserves dignity, and sometimes the most powerful justice is the kind born from simple human decency.